Spent the last week running from the heat, but the beat's coming alive. Let's get lost tonight. Lord, who's on my
right? Hello, wackos. I am here. As I said, it's a big month of travel. Well, that shouldn't have moved that way. It's a big month of travel for me, so I apologize that we are only doing a couple live shows this month. But as I always do, I have set up a wonderful episode for you today. But that is also I recorded 2 episodes in one day, so it's same outfit 2 weeks in a row. You know I would never, but I absolutely have to. This is a cute one too. As I think Mike said, it's giving Kill Bill, and I didn't really realize that it's an all black Kill Bill. It's Posh Spice meets Kill Bill. But I have been promising you guys for a few weeks an interview with my friend Brian Silva from Americans United for Separation of Church and State. This is basically the counter argument to the interview that we had with Pastor Jackson Lahmeyer from the White House Faith Council a couple weeks ago. And and so we have that interview for you today. I think it was a really good conversation. I tried to ask a lot of questions, especially based on the conversation that I had with the pastor, to kind of give a counterpoint and try to remind us why separation of church and state is so important, and also some calls to action, because I know that a lot of the people who listen to this podcast and watch this podcast are people who want to do something but feel so overwhelmed, which is the goal, which Brian reinforces, but don't know exactly what the best thing to do or what they can do with the time, money, energy, funds that they have. And so, this is kind of, the separation of church and state, the reminder of why that is so important, the reminder why this was one of the part of the foundation of why America was founded, part of the template, part of the framework of what makes America so unique and special. So the enemy of the state this week is very simply people who are trying to erode this separation between church and state, because
enemy of the state.
As we explore in today's episode, it's not only bad for people who are anti-religion. It's bad for people who want to peacefully follow any religion that basically isn't Christianity. So like if you are anything other than a Christian nationalist yourself, and it's also like, Christian nationalists are certainly giving a bad name to people who are truly living their life in a good Christian way, a positive Christian way, who want to give back to their neighbors, who believe that people should be treated equally, who, want to help people with less money than them, who are, all these kinds of things. And so I wanted to start this episode off, because it will be mostly the interview. I wanted to start this episode off with a piece from Time magazine. It's from this year, but it's from the summer in July, but pretty evergreen. Why the founders fought for the separation of church and state. This is by John A. Ragosta from and it says / Made by History, which I guess is a segment from Time magazine. 250 years ago, the American Revolution began with the shot heard round the world. The revolution set the stage for a new nation based not on ethnicity or geography or religion, but on striving for democratic principles. Religious freedom was among the most important of those principles. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and 18th century evangelicals were all deeply committed to religious freedom, including a strict separation of church and state. Having lived in a world in which government and religion were intertwined, they saw separation as essential to prevent corruption of both religion and government, right? So it's protection for both these things, and to mitigate conflicts among diverse new citizens, which the point was we welcome those kind of people, meaning anyone who's not like us, right? Sadly, that founding principle is under attack today in the courts and by President Donald Trump and his supporters. Several Supreme Court justices have openly questioned the principle, its application to the states, and its historic antecedents, and Republican lawmakers have promoted initiatives to fund religious schools with tax dollars and use claims of religious freedom to undermine laws against discrimination. Jefferson, Madison, and their evangelical supporters would be stunned. The revolution's 250th anniversary is a good time to reflect on not only the importance of religious freedom, but also how it was won and what it meant to the patriots who fought to secure it. Before the revolution, there was no separation of church and state in the American colonies. Many colonies supported established churches with tax dollars. Others imposed religious restrictions on voting or holding office. In Virginia, the most populous colony, the Church of England was the established church. Everyone paid taxes to support it, even non-members: Presbyterians, Baptists, Quakers, Lutherans, and other religious dissenters. For most, the church tax was the largest tax they paid. The Anglican Church also controlled marriage, poor relief, care of orphans, and enforced laws regarding profanity and church attendance. If dissenters with young children died, Anglican officials would often place the orphan children in a good Anglican home. Religious dissenters who failed to attend Anglican services regularly were frequently fined, while a blind eye was turned to Anglican members' absences. But in spite of this discrimination, religious dissent grew rapidly in the mid-18th century, led by evangelical Presbyterians and Baptists. In response, Anglicans turned from legal discrimination to outright persecution. Establishment supporters chased dissenting ministers with dogs, threw rocks, and occasionally fired a shot. Men on horseback whipped gathered worshipers. A hornet's nest was thrown into one prayer meeting. A communion table was desecrated with the most slovenly things, Baptist minister Morgan Edwards reported. By the time of the American Revolution, over half of the Baptist ministers in Virginia suffered jail time on trumped-up charges of disturbing the peace or preaching without a license. Many countered that their license came from, quote, King Jesus. Even in prison, ministers were attacked. James Ireland was urinated on as he preached from a ground-level window in a Culpeper County jail. John Weatherford, with arms outstretched in prayer from his cell in Chesterfield County, had his arms cut with knives. Despite these attacks, when the Revolution began, dissenters accounted for as much as 1/3 of Virginia's population, and Patriot leaders quickly realized that their support was desperately needed in the fight against Britain. Dissenters saw their chance and demanded religious freedom as their price for supporting the war. An extended negotiation ensued. Dissenters flooded the General Assembly with petitions listing needed reforms, ending church taxes, making poor relief a civil matter, and giving dissenting ministers the right to perform marriages. These things granted, they would support the fight. If religious freedom was guaranteed, internal animosities may cease. They offered an implicit threat, noting the desperate need for this word I'm never going to be able to say, even though it's like unanimity. Can someone say it for me? Like clearly.
No, you've got me tongue twisted. I know how to say.
I know,
this word.
no. I just there's some words that I just can't say. I just cannot say it.
Unanimity.
But there's no N at the end. I can't. You know what I mean, guys. This is crazy. It's also 2:00 in the morning. A newspaper letter demanded restrictions be removed.
Unanimity.
There you go. Thank you. That was beautiful. Unanimity. There you go. Sometimes you just need to hear someone say it. A newspaper letter demanded restrictions be removed, closing portents portentously, a word to the wise is enough. In what Jefferson described as the severest contests he ever fought, contests he ever fought, the General Assembly slowly lifted restrictions on dissent, but by the war's end, reforms were incomplete. When supporters of the old Anglican order sought to impose a new church tax in 1784, dissenters reacted with outrage. One Baptist minister wrote, "The unlawful cohabitation between church and state, which has so often been looked upon as holy wedlock, must now suffer a separation and be put forever asunder." With Jefferson serving as minister to France, Madison introduced in the Assembly Jefferson's Statute for Religious Freedom, which later became a foundation for the First Amendment. The Virginia statute separates church and state, explaining that our civil rights have no dependence on our religious opinions, and religion shall in no wise diminish, enlarge, or affect a person's civil capacities. Jefferson later triumphantly declared that the First Amendment created a wall of separation between church and state. In 1879, a unanimous Supreme Court agreed. Of course, religious restrictions continued for years. Officials and people testifying in court often had to take a religious oath. Bible reading was mandated in many schools. Other discrimination was imposed. But over time, a strong American movement steered toward Jeffersonian separation of church and state. This shouldn't surprise us. In fact, many of the principles on which this nation was built were aspirational and not always met by the founders. The foul institution of slavery as well as persistent discrimination against women and Native Americans, made a mockery of the declaration that all men are created equal. But the principle became a rallying cry for millions who demanded and continue to demand that they be treated with equity. The same has been true for religious freedom. Our nation continues to struggle with fully implementing the principle, including separation of church and state. For example, Jefferson was clear that religious freedom did not give anyone a right to ignore neutral, what he called impartial laws. Up to the late 20th century, the religious exemptions that Jefferson warned about were widely rejected. For example, in a 1990 Supreme Court case, Employment Division v. Smith, Justice Antonin Scalia pointed out that religious exemptions to neutral laws would entangle government and religion and result in a hodgepodge of laws. But then, in the poorly named Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993, Congress overturned that principle and put the burden on the government to oppose such exemptions. Now, if a law prohibits a business from discriminating on the basis of sexual orientation, a business might try to refuse to serve a same-sex couple, citing religious beliefs. A business or hospital opposed to birth control might try to claim an exemption from government health care or insurance regulations. In 2017, President Trump sought to expand such religious exemptions by executive order and has since promised more church-state entanglements. In the past, this type of exception left the door open, for example, to businesses refusing to serve African Americans, claiming that they are suffering the curse of Ham. Today, people may attempt to justify other illegal actions based on religion. Jefferson and his supporters understood that such mixing of church and state corrupted both. In 2005, when the Supreme Court struck down a courthouse display of the Ten Commandments, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor channeled Jefferson by asking those who would renegotiate the boundaries between church and state, why would we trade a system that has served us so well for one that has served others so poorly? The question rings true today. The fight for religious freedom and separation of church and state continues, as it does for the founding principles, from equality to citizenship rights to freedom of movement. But in spite of the failures and shortcomings, these principles still stand as ideas that Americans can strive to realize. And then it gives a little bit background on the writer of this piece. But I thought that was a good, kind of reminder of why America is the way it is, of why the separation of church and state is so important, how things could look, how things have looked. And that brings us to, the main meat of today's episode. I am interviewing Brian Silva. He is the Vice President of Outreach at Americans United for Separation of Church and State. a little bit about their work. We've talked about them on the show before, but Americans United is the only organization dedicated solely to defending the separation of church and state. We are the shield protecting the foundational American principle of freedom of religion, including the right to believe or not believe for all. Americans United was founded in 1947 to defend the separation of church and state. The founders were a curious combination of liberals, fundamentalists, and clergy. Their goal was to assure the maintenance of the American principle of separation of church and state, upon which the federal Constitution guarantees religious liberty to all the people and all churches of this republic. And their mission is Congress, and this is in the founding document from 1947. It says, quote, Congress and all state legislatures and all executive and judiciary agencies of government but must be warned that they are playing with fire when they play into the hands of any church which seeks to breach the wall that sharply separates church and state in this country. The principle of their separation is so firmly established in a long tradition, as well as in the Constitution, that any tampering with it will tend to light the fires of intolerance and fanaticism, which we see a lot of that right now, which our system of government is designed to prevent. And the origins of Americans United date back to a U.S. Supreme Court decision in Everson v. Board of Education, which was issued on February 10th, 1947. The ruling violated the separation of church and state by extending public funds to religious schools. A coalition of leaders from religious and educational communities met in Chicago to decide how to respond to the ruling. And we talk about this in the interview briefly. Some religious groups were already lobbying for more forms of tax aid, and they wanted to make sure that door remained tightly shut. The group decided to form a national organization that would educate the American people about the importance of church-state separation and advocate for that principle in courts, state legislatures, and Congress. And Americans United for the Separation of Church and State was born. So I think this is, I just think this is a great organization.
Didn't he say it was Protestant Americans for Separation of Church and State was the original name?
I think that he said that, I'd have to go back to the interview, but I think that he said that Protestants were involved in the forming, not that. I don't know that he said that was actually the original name, but it possibly could have been.
That's what I remember from granted, this was 6 hours ago now, so I'm not sure.
I don't know that it was 6 hours ago, but yeah, we've been recording for a long time here. But yeah, I mean, I think the most interesting part of it is that this was a group founded by religious people. I think a lot of times when people think of separation of church and state, they think it's a bunch of heathens, a bunch of godless folks doing it. When in reality, it's people who take religion very seriously, who are really at the core of this. And as we talk about in the interview, every major and minor religion, they have people representing that and working together who want these, people to be able to pursue whatever faith they want to pursue in peace in this country. And so that, I think, is something that a lot of people might not be aware of. They must, a lot of people probably think this is some kind of atheist, agnostic pursuit, when in reality, this is a lot of people who are regular worshipers and are people of faith who are behind organizations like this, who realize how important it is. Yeah. And
I would argue that if you have paid any attention to the United States government, why you would want your religion mixed up with that mess is shocking to me.
I agree. I concur. I didn't even like when they started, reading tarot on Fox News. That was too close for me. But yeah.
Is that your church or your state?
It's neither. I mean, I guess it would be closer to church than state. But yeah, so without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Brian Silva from Americans United, and I'll pop in to talk a little bit and unpack what we discussed at the end. Enjoy. Hello, everybody. We are here. Everyone heard the riveting interview we had with Pastor Jackson Lahmeyer a couple weeks ago from the White House Faith Council, and it made me have faith, that's for sure. And I promised you that we would have another interview to have the other side of the conversation explained, the other viewpoint explained, as we do on this show. So today we are joined by Brian Silva. He is Vice President of Outreach at Americans United. Welcome. Do we say Americans United for separation of church and state, or do we just go to Americans United?
We can lead with the first one, so right. But then we can Americans United after that.
Okay. So that's what they do. Because I saw your JVN clip as I said, and I said, okay, wow, that's good to know that we have this organization even exists, because a lot of people have been writing in. We do God Watch on this show, and a lot of people have been extremely concerned about how Christianity is, in quotes, certainly Christianity is taking over our government, seemingly a pretty fast pace. And so let's start out the interview. Can you explain what Americans United does and why the separation of church and state is such a foundational American principle?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having me.
Of course.
So Americans United was founded almost 80 years ago. It was originally named Protestants and Others for the separation of church and state. People always say, like, oh, aren't you an anti-religious organization? It's like, nah, we were founded by religious people.
Yeah.
And we were actually founded because people that were not Catholic were getting really concerned back in the day that public money was going to fund Catholic schools. Like, they're like, well, that's not my religion and that's my tax dollars. And so it was religious people standing up to protect, their religious rights. And so, we have worked now for, like I said, almost 80 years to keep religion and government separate, and to make sure that people have the right to believe as they choose, to practice those beliefs, but with the one simple caveat that you just can't use that to harm other people. You can't use it to discriminate against others. You can't use it to get out of following the law. You can't use it to, deny people service at a restaurant or something like that. So, I think that there's actually this is really one of the only protections that people who have a religious belief in our country have. It's both the freedom of religion and the freedom from religion. It protects the right of people to believe or not to believe. And, that was the great American experiment, right? It was like, this was going to be the place. And, it was an experiment with many flaws, but one of the things they really did get right was that this was going to be a place where people could have multiple beliefs and be treated fairly for it.
Right. And that's why it's so alarming when so many people say, well, America was founded as a Christian nation. And I go, well, no, it was supposed to you come here and you can believe what you want to believe. That was the whole point. And I go, unless I missed something in like fourth grade.
Yeah. Like it was, we always talk about it, like the separation of church and state. It is an American original. It is the first country that, its founding document doesn't reference God. Like that's where the power comes from. It comes from the power of the people. People talk about America founded as a Christian nation. Well, the word Jesus, the word Bible, the word God doesn't appear in the Constitution anywhere. In fact, there's explicit restrictions on that in the Constitution. In two very big places. The first in the First Amendment, where Congress shall make no law to establish religion nor prevent the free exercise of. That's kind of the yin and the yang that balances. And then, there's also that there will be no religious test for public office. I mean, these things seem so benign right now, but like back then, like that was wild. And then you have all these examples throughout history, Thomas Jefferson writing a letter to Baptist congregation, saying that there is a wall between separation of church and state. Other founding fathers, sending letters to countries across the ocean about, this the land of the Jew and the Christian and the Muslim and the non-believer. Like there's like so many examples of this, and they didn't have to do this. They didn't have to do this. It probably would have been a lot easier.
They went out of their way to do this.
Yeah.
And I just see so much. I mean, and I'm like, maybe it's sometimes you think maybe it's my algorithm. Maybe I'm just noticing it more because I started, talking about it more on this show. But I really feel like I am just seeing so many more articles, especially ones that are, like coming to me through Instagram or TikTok about people finding God and people not realizing that they needed God in their life. Like, a day or two ago, I get an email from Free Press, and I know they've gone a little bit in a weird direction, but at one point I liked the Free Press. And, the title of this, opinion piece was, "I thought I didn't need God. I was wrong." And I'm just like, it felt strange to get this in a place that usually is covering news stories. I'm like, how is you discovering God a news story? This seems like some kind of an existential crisis you were going through, and you could write about this in your journal, or you could talk about this at church or temple or wherever you found God. But I'm like, why is this in my inbox right now when I was trying to learn more about the ceasefire?
Well, evidently it was news for that person. Right. Like, hey, I didn't realize this. I needed God.
Yeah. So have you seen a lot more pieces that are almost trying to convince people? Like, I saw it a lot, I guess, previously on my other podcast. There was, feminism and anti-slut shaming really entered the zeitgeist. And then there was all these opinion pieces that came out, 5-10 years later that were like, what? I was a slut in my 20s and I regret it. And this feels like the same thing. Like, I've been godless all my life and now I regret it, and I don't want you to have this same regret.
Yeah. Well, I think what's really interesting is that, like, the freedom of religion and the separation of church and state protects somebody to believe in God and find God at age 1 or 11 or 41 or 61 and completely change their lifestyle to match that and live by those beliefs. They can even walk up to other people and say, "Hey, I found something really great and I want to tell you about it, and I would like to invite you to come and join." Like, that's all protected because we don't allow government to impose another religion. You look at countries around the world where it's a singular religion, sometimes where it's like tolerated that there's others, and others where, there can be like violence or death for believing in another religion. Like, that is protected. That article in the Free Press, which might not be free or press, but free is what it protects the right of that person to say that. The only thing it doesn't protect them to do is to say, "I found God at this age, and now I'm going to go write a law and says everybody has to find that same God and practice by those religious beliefs." Or say, "I no longer believe in God," and then pass a law and say nobody gets to believe in God. It's like, it's a double-edged sword. But for this small segment of white Christian nationalists and other religious extremists, they're just not happy enough with allowing people to believe how they want to believe.
Right.
Like, it has, like, there's something there that it's like, it's not enough. I have to force you to believe what I want to believe. And, that couldn't be any more un-American than about anything that I could think of.
Right. And that's the part that I can't get past, because funnily enough, the former co-host of this show found God. It became super Catholic. And I think a lot of people often, write me and want me to give some kind of dissertation on my thoughts on that. And I go, I have no thoughts on that. He's allowed to do that, and I'm glad he found whatever he was looking for. Like, that's great. That's what growing up and becoming your true self is all about. Like, I have no further thoughts on that at all. And as long as he doesn't try to impose those beliefs on me, and he does not. Like, that's where I would have to draw the line.
And that's why you get to stay friends.
Yeah, I'm like, that's where I would draw the line, and that has not happened. So it doesn't offend me, even though perhaps I don't agree with the beliefs. So why do you think, obviously, that your organization has been around for 80 years? You've been doing this work for 80, not you personally, but
I'm looking really good.
Looking great.
Our new skincare routine we're selling today.
Do you feel like right now the issue feels more urgent than it has in the past 5-10 years? And if so, what is the urgency coming from?
So it's this real interesting dichotomy, because it feels like so urgent. And like you mentioned, it's like, where is this coming from? It sort of feels like it's like coming out of nowhere.
Right.
But the truth is that, like, the history of white Christian nationalism goes back like hundreds of years. I mean, I'm going to take a little sidestep in history right now, because we just had Columbus Day / Indigenous Peoples Day. And part of the reason that, Columbus was authorized or allowed to sail and quote unquote discover new worlds was because, like, the Pope and religious leaders said, we gift you the ability to go and claim lands for us and convert heathens into Christianity. Like, it was the original Christian nationalism. Like, we're going to go to places where people have other beliefs and we're just going to say, no, you can only like live by that. And like that has been passed down through the ages and through like, you know, the KKK, through Manifest Destiny, through all these other things. And then what you started to have kind of like in the 50s and 60s and 70s is this like sort of awakening of, you know, hey, maybe we should let people live how they want to live. And obviously, you know, that's the rise of the civil rights movement, of feminism, of environmentalism, of like gay rights. And the real changing point, you know, a lot of people think that a lot of this Christian conservatism comes from the debate around abortion. But when the Roe v. Wade was passed, like the moral majority and like Charles Dobson and others all came out in favor of it and were in favor of it for like 3, 4, 5 years before they spoke out against it because they didn't care about it. What they cared about was the mixing of black and white people. And what finally drove them bonkers was the Supreme Court ruled in a 9-0 case against that might have been Oral Roberts University, that a university is not inherently a charitable organization, so 501c3, so think tax dollars and tax exempt, if they don't allow people of different races to enter into there. And so what they said was like, well, you know, that's a real losing argument in public to be like, hey, come join our church because we're super fucking racist. And so they found another issue, which was abortion. And then abortion became the thing that they rallied around. And then that started to grow this moral majority movement. And they realized that the only way that they were going to be able to protect the things they cared about, whether it be racism or anti-abortion or, you know, tamping down women's rights, was to get involved in politics. And that's the rise of the moral majority. And that's where you start to see, you know, eventually, which will elect Ronald Reagan, but then he disappoints them, and he, you know, because he appointed Sandra Day O'Connor, like, how dare you, you know, and so then they keep trying. So this modern version of white Christian nationalism, which is built on this like history. If you ever get a chance to watch a documentary called Bad Faith, it chronicles this in 90 minutes. It's a quick watch. It's terribly depressing, and it's a free or 99 cents on Apple TV. But this is what continues to get them to rise. And then really the breaking point of what broke of breaking it out was the election of the first black president, because now all of a sudden they're just seeing like, oh, our power is really starting to wane. And that's what you're seeing now kind of in politics. And, you know, it was the Tea Party movement at first, but really it was just this underlying current being given permission to come up.
Right. Yeah. Because I think that's so confusing. Anytime I talk to these, like, you know, Christian nationalists, somehow the conversation always comes down to race, and that's where they lose me. I go, you know, if there's it seems like if we're talking about Christianity, this would be something that, you know, whether you're white or black, as long as you're Christian, you should be able to agree on, and that should be like, you know, the number one red flag that this isn't actually really a conversation about Christianity. This is a conversation about power, power structures,
power, money, control. Dr. Martin Luther King used to say the most segregated hour in the United States was at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning. You know, I mean, this idea of Christianity and God loves all people and we're all created equal in the eyes of God. It's like, well, that's great on paper, but then you see some folks trying to live that out in their quote unquote Christianity, and it's not so great. I do want to give a shout out though to like the overwhelming majority of like fantastic Christians, because white Christian nationalists are still a minority in here. They have an inordinate like hold on power, but some of like the folks that we work closest with are faith leaders of all faiths, but especially in Christian denominations, which is really heartening to me, because I think that always gives a little bit of hope that there's a way to dial this back, whether you're a Christian or not. Like, you know, that there's people that might look like they're on the opposite side that are fighting super hard to stop this.
Yeah, no, I often, there's, you know, two of my really close friends in comedy are very, you know, big Christians, and that's not something that's common in stand-up comedy. So I always just think of like, that's what Christianity really is. And
but
I always
there's so many good jokes
myself.
with like a Christian, you know, walks into a bar.
There are. Well, I mean, I'm actually friends with a super Christian comic, John Christ, who half the time he'll go through his set and I'm like, it's all Bible references. I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm learning so much so quickly. All right. And then, so Christian nationalism has become this, I know they're still in the minority, but it has become a mainstream political force. I think when before it was like more of a fringe movement. And do you have a specific definition for when we're looking for Christian nationalism? Like, how can we tell that something is Christian nationalism, not just Christianity? And what are the real world implications for this in our democracy?
Yeah, so the way we define it is it's this dangerous belief that America is and must remain a Christian nation founded on its white Christian beliefs.
Okay.
So if a lot of people say like, well, I get my values from my faith.
Sure.
So does that make me a Christian nationalist? No, it doesn't.
Right.
Everybody has values.
Yeah.
Some people have values because what their parents taught them or in school or, from the Torah or, from whatever. The question is that when you're trying to create common law or a common society, are you trying to impose that on other people who either one, don't want it, or two, is going to harm them? Because that's not a nation that we can live under where everybody's allowed to have their own beliefs.
Right.
And so it's, of course, built on that myth and lie that we were talking about earlier, that America was founded as a white Christian nation and is destined to, to be, to prioritize and make supreme, their version of Christianity, which is also, often, for white people only.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, how much have UN Americans United looked into what's happening with the White House Faith Council? Is this like, is this something you're spending hours a day doing? Like, and I know, obviously, like Trump is not the first administration to have such a council. We kind of went through the history of people, presidents doing that. So it's not unique to him, but it certainly seems like there's more of a spotlight on it now. And I don't know that these people are of the highest caliber.
Yeah. They didn't bring the sharpest tools from the shed to bear, I think. So there's a group at our organization who every few weeks when this Religious Liberty Commission gets together, they gather around Zoom and then they get the rest of the day off because it's just an abhorrent thing to watch when these folks meet. I mean, the stuff that they're talking, like we want mandatory prayer in schools,
right,
and we want Bibles in schools, and we think parents should be able to, basically like their kids should have Bibles taught in the schools. It's all really wild. What's crazy is that when you ask parents, like, okay, so would you want teachers, right? I was a high school history teacher. You want me to be teaching your kid not the history of religion? That's always been legal, and there's great classes about that.
Yeah.
But you want me to be teaching your kid how to interpret the Bible, because I interpret the Bible a very different way than you probably do, because I love my husband and I think it's perfectly legal. We should be married. And,
right,
that person, may not. And then they get really weirded out. And then they're like, oh, wait. And it's like, yeah. So like those little types of questions start to pierce it. But this Religious Liberty Commission is just, it's off the rails. They're the most extreme versions of this cadre of white Christian nationalists. And there's always a few people that are not Christian up there. Mm-hmm. We actually just did a webinar about the rise of the multiracial, multi-religious far right. We had representatives from Judaism and Islam and Hinduism, both, and then Black and brown communities, because I think there's also this assumption too that it's white Christian nationalism or Christian nationalism. So, it's all white people. But, there's many folks, there's definitely a significant sliver of folks of color that also support many of the tenets. And again, because like you said, it comes down to power and it comes down to money and it comes down, to having that authority syndrome. Mm-hmm. So they're going to keep meeting. They're allegedly going to be coming out with new rules about what type, prayers in public schools and things like that. And it's like, you just want to shake them and be like, prayer is already legal in public school, right? Any kid, any teacher, anybody that wants to sit down and say a prayer can do that. That's been protected forever. What you can't do is have the teacher stand up in front of the classroom and say, now kids, everybody bow your heads and we're going to say the Our Father. Because this kid over here who doesn't believe in God, and this kid over here who's Hindu, and that girl over there who's Jewish, they don't believe those things. But what 7, 8, 10-year-old kid in a classroom is going to stand up and say, like, Mrs. Fisher, I don't want to do that because I don't believe in that.
Right.
And that's why it's not allowed.
Yeah,
It's
I was
coercive.
like me, but that's why, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you would.
That's why I was only getting sent to the principal's office for reasons like that. Like I was, outing the fire department for taking down the set in the school play. That's the kind of reason that I was getting sent.
That could have been your first podcast.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Corinne gets kicked out again.
Yeah, it was always getting kicked out for some like highbrow reason, which is perhaps even more annoying. Now, do you think we have Christian nationalism gaining power because of the people in office, but do you think there's like a genuine public buy-in to that worldview that's happening now? I mean, even going, there's a connection to these more, traditional values that we've certainly seen in polling, at least among like young men, certainly, who are thinking more about, marriage and children than we've seen in several decades. Like, do you think it's something that's growing on TikTok, on Instagram? Do you think people generally feel lost and are subscribing to Christianity more, or where do you think this is coming from?
Yeah, I think faith has always been something that has been important for a lot of people.
Right.
We've also seen over the last few decades, all of the polling, the rise of the nones, right? The atheists, the agnostics, people. I mean, how many people in your life do you know who are like, I don't believe in religion, but I'm spiritual?
I guess. Well,
yeah. So
me many.
Me many, yeah. And so, yeah, so I think it's a real disillusionment with organized religion, and that's not something our organization takes any stand on, but I think that it has given to the rise of just this more diversity of people and also more visibility for people who might be non-religious. And I think that's one thing that does like concern certain Christian nationalists is like, they see the rise of people, thinking differently, which we're supposed to celebrate in this country. I think also we live in a very detached age, right? We're supposed to be we're so interconnected with social media and with the internet and everything. But in fact, it's just very easy for either us to be completely alone or because of the algorithm, it just spirals us into the things that we're willing to watch more of. And so I think it is easier to like get lonely and find yourself and attach yourself to things that might, look flashy or look powerful or look important, but, they're empty promises, right? White Christian nationalists are not, looking, they're not sitting there thinking about like the young, white teenager, young man sitting alone in his room feeling alone. They're putting this out on social media thinking like that's who we're trying to help. They're like, no, we're trying to help ourselves. But hey, if we can get you in the process to support us, then we're going to go ahead and do it because it's all about that power. So I think that.
So it's kind of like a numbers game, we're not really targeting you to help you, sure, but we're just going to get anyone we can get on with this mission.
Absolutely, because their goal is to take over the government, right? I mean, The Handmaid's Tale is obviously a very extreme example of it, but we're seeing it right now. Once you gain power, now all of a sudden it's we just had a court case today where it sounds like the Supreme Court's going to throw out the rest of the Voting Rights Act, right, basically saying that racism in drawing congressional districts is fine. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then that's going to make it more difficult for progressives and other people to get elected. They ruled a few years ago that it was fine to draw gerrymandered districts to favor one party over another. They're doing all these things. Trump with all of his redistricting and gerrymandering in Texas and Missouri and other places redrawing it. So it's once you get power and you also realize that you're not the majority, then you start to do these things to try and create an authoritarian system where you can even run elections. I mean, Turkey has elections, Iran has elections, Venezuela had an election. There are places all over the world that have elections. Full disclosure, Americans doesn't work on anything outside of the U.S. Right. But I think it's important, though, we can learn things from other countries where we see, rise of authoritarianism, whether it's white Christian nationalism or something else, and say that, we can watch it happening here, and we can see how that can turn into, laws. I mean, trying to ban mifepristone, trying to ban abortion, trying to ban trans healthcare, trying to be able to say, because of my religious belief, I don't have to hire women because that's what my faith tells me. There are all of these cases that are passing or that are in the process of things. They try to outlaw PrEP for queer and straight people. And so it is right here on our doorstep, and they're just trying to continue to chip away, because once they have those halls of power, then they can keep it. And if you're somebody who's feeling disillusioned, being inside the halls of power, whether falsely or realistically, is pretty attractive. Power is attractive.
Right. Yeah.
So.
And I mean, and then what do you say to these people who come on and argue, or when you try to have a conversation, say that, well, they believe that a faith-based influence on politics is either inevitable or desirable? Like, what's your rebuttal to someone saying that?
That's an opinion. I have one of those too.
Right.
I also have two arms. Sure, that is an opinion, but I think we can look back in history and see a lot of people who were guided by their faith that had some pretty shitty results, and so to say that faith in of itself is by itself in a vacuum is good or bad. It's the person that is executing that faith that makes it good or bad. Just like a person who has no faith, can both also still do good and bad things based on the values that they, were raised with. And the idea behind, the American concept of separation of church and state is that everybody gets to, again, have the beliefs that they want and live by those. But the minute that crosses the line to start harming other people, that's where we have to stop and say, either this isn't allowed, or we need to talk about how to adjust or change this. And it seems like a pretty simple concept, but again, when one sides are starting to make people be like the enemy, then all of a sudden it feels like harm to other people doesn't always feel so bad. So.
And you talked about a couple of the most recent news stories regarding, separation of church and state, or legislative moves that would perhaps threaten the wall between church and state. Do you feel like those are what out of those were the most alarming examples?
Can I start with the wildest one?
Yeah, please. That's exactly what I want to hear. Kind of the craziest things, the ones where it ends up on your desk, or it ends up on your Google, and you're like, I can't even believe I'm reading this right now.
Okay, so this is wild. So Quincy, Massachusetts.
Okay.
So they decide they're going to build a new public police station. Okay. Right, police station, public, everybody gets to go. So they're building it, they're at the end of it, and all of a sudden they discover that the mayor has spent $750,000 on Catholic saint statues to install on the building.
Wow. I mean, just fiscally, that's mind-blowing.
You know what you could do with $750,000? I mean, in this economy?
Right. And on a municipal level, to be spending that amount of money.
Oh, my gosh. And of course, there's there's nothing wrong with this. And some people were standing up trying to be we're like, no. So Americans United was filed to overturn this. And we actually just received today a judgment from the district court judge, basically upholding our injunction for them not to install those and go to trial and hopefully return $750,000 back to the people of Quincy, Massachusetts.
Are those statues refundable?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't. Gosh, maybe
a small business is going down.
Yeah. You know who could use them? A Catholic church. That's who could buy them, install them in a place where they are supposed to be. So that's kind of the more wild side of it.
And what was the mayor's? Did he have was there a quote that he had why he thought this was acceptable?
I don't know. I don't want to presume what was going through the good mayor's mind.
Right.
But, it was just yeah. I mean, I'm not part of our legal team. We have a fantastic legal team, but I do kind of wonder, when that came across their desk, if they were just nah, right? This is, we're going to look into this, but there's no way that this happened. But
I feel like even a Catholic who has any money sense is going to be angry about that.
Yeah. So that's like sort of on like the more like wild side. In Oklahoma, we have a number of court cases. A couple of them, the former superintendent of public instruction, Ryan Walters, boo hiss. He just resigned from his job. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the very low approval ratings that he had. But he spent millions of dollars on buying the Trump version of the Bible.
Oh my gosh.
Trying to buy this to install in every public classroom in Oklahoma. Also, newsflash, Oklahoma's like 48th in education in the country. We work with so many parents out there who are like, do you know what we could do with like $1 million in like the schools?
Yeah.
So they tried to do that. They tried to pass this Bible-infused curriculum. They also tried to approve the first publicly funded religious charter school. So it was going to be a Catholic school.
Okay.
So, see, this Catholic school thing keeps coming up.
Right.
I love working with our Catholic folks and Americans United, though, because they're the first ones that are standing up and being like, no. And so your taxpayer dollars in Oklahoma would have gone to fund this charter school that was open to the public, that was going to not indoctrinate like Catholic teachings into them, would have been able to also say like, we don't serve disabled kids, queer kids are against our our doctrine. Yeah.
How about like if a Jewish student, for instance, wanted to go and like was willing to learn the Catholicism, would they be banned from attending such a school? Or
I don't know if they would be banned, but like I would take that and say, like, imagine a Jewish school kid walking into the local public school and they said, you're welcome to come in here as long as you don't practice, as long as you don't wear like, your yarmulke or your Star of David or whatever.
As long as you know you're going to hell.
Yeah, exactly.
I had a roommate who thought that about me and I said, Mazel tov.
And it's just, it's just like, it's not, now we have nothing, there's nothing against private schools. Private schools are allowed to exist. Like they're protected by law. Yeah. People can choose to send their kids there.
Right.
But what you can't do is take public money that's supposed to serve all people and send it to places that don't, especially when it comes to something like public education. So like that was another one. We have 3 states that we have lawsuits in, Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas, that passed statewide bills to mandate the posting of their rewritten version of the Protestant 10 Commandments.
What are the edits?
Well, first of all, there's 12.
Okay.
In one of the states, I think there's like 12, but like
they added.
Yeah, well, because there's so many different versions of the Bible, right?
Right.
Each denomination rewrites it, and then there's like the patriarchy version and like all this. So there's lots of different versions. So anytime you mandate it, you're picking one over the other.
Okay.
So that's what they did, and each one has something different, and mandate that it's published and posted in each of these public schools. Again, you think about like what that money could be going towards. You think about that Hindu kid who walks into sit down in the classroom and the first thing that he sees is a sign that says, I am the God above all gods, thou shalt have no one, above me, the Christian God. Like, what does that do to make a kid feel welcome? What does that do to make a kid learn better?
Yeah, I was going to say it's certainly money that is not spent on making people smarter. It's making them seemingly like more subservient.
Yeah, exactly. And then, again, it starts to go back with this whole idea of like putting more religion into public schools. We talk to parents all the time in these states, and even ones that are like more conservative or evangelical, once you ask them like, do you think there should be more religion in schools? They might start to be like, yeah, or maybe the 10 Commandments thing isn't so bad. It's like, cool. Who do you think should be teaching your kids religion? And they're like, parents, grandparents, and pastors. And I'm like, which one of those is at the front of the classroom teaching your kid about this religion you just put in there? And all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, maybe we don't need to do that.
Right. It's very confusing because this is the same group of people that often say teachers are having too much power. They're influencing our students too much with gender identity or whatever it may be, and we want to have more power in the home. And then then you're like, okay, well, seemingly if religion is so important to you, you're allowing the teacher to then be one of the main moral compasses choices in your child's life. So it's like, do you want them to have more power? Do you not want them to have more power? Do you want them to do you want to create the syllabus and send it in? It's very confusing.
It is very confusing. And, it's like, I think there are a lot of good people out there who, when you ask them basic questions like, should there be prayer in public schools?
Right.
You still get a lot of people that say yes. And if you take it just one step further and say, did you know that it was already legal and always has been for a kid to pray at any time in school? And they're like, oh, I didn't know that. Did you know that the only thing that isn't allowed is for the teacher to stand in front and lead or require all of them to pray together or pray as the teacher wants them to pray? Right. Oh, well, I don't want that.
Right.
So sometimes like this is why I am such a big fan.
Sorry, I hate to cut you off. I'm just wondering specifically about Texas passing that amendment where they said the 10 Commandments have to be in class. That was, in fact, passed on a Sunday, no?
I would not put it past them. I do believe that might have been also the legislature where somebody stood up and said was it the lieutenant governor whose wife is leaving him for... I don't know why, but isn't there one of the commandments on there that says thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not commit adultery,
right?
And so it's like
it's selective.
It's just such a farce, right? It's just such a farce, and it's not to say that everybody has to be perfect who's a religious person. We're all imperfect people,
yeah.
But the fact is that if you want to teach your kid which commandment is the most important, or all of them are, or that the Bible is like factual, or the Bible is a guide of stories to help you be a better person, you as your parent or the pastor or the rabbi, that's who should be teaching that. That's who should be instilling that. And that's why we have the separation of church and state, because it also wouldn't be fair for an evangelical Christian kid to sit in there and be taught, the Torah, or to be taught, Native American, spiritual beliefs, or Hinduism as a belief and indoctrination, not just as like, world religions course. Like, it's not fair for anybody. And that's why, instead of fighting about which one's supposed to get to win, this amazing American experiment was to say, we are going to separate religion and government. And we're going to keep religion something that is private for people to practice. And you can bring it into the public square for discussion and say, I believe this because of that. But when it comes to public policy, that was the dividing line. That's where we say, but we're going to make policies that work for and respect everyone. And that's what we're straying away from. And that's what Americans United is fighting to bring back.
Right. And like, what is your stance? I mean, like, I, even as a young girl, when, we would stand at the beginning of the day in homeroom and say the Pledge of Allegiance, I always thought it was weird that we're pledging allegiance, one nation under God. And I was like, it just seems like some things are kind of slipping through the cracks here.
So here's the thing. I was raised Catholic. And I truly give the fact that I work in like, to want to make the world a better place. I absolutely, my Catholic upbringing is where I got that from my parents. But the Catholics are also, so the Knights of Columbus, the Catholic organization in the 1940s, they were the ones that during like the communist scare basically whipped up this ferment in Congress to make them add under God into the Pledge of Allegiance. So it wasn't there for hundreds or however many years. Like, it's literally not, it's such a recent invention to add into there. But then people are like, oh, well, but God is in the Pledge of Allegiance, so we must be a Christian nation. It's like, well, unless we were founded in the 1940s, that doesn't really fly.
Right. And how about things like in God we trust on our money?
Yeah. I mean, it would be great if it wasn't there.
Because these are like little things that I guess have just always been bothering me since childhood. And I've gone through, different phases of my life where I believed in God and some where I didn't. And it honestly has very little to do with anything happening politically. Often has to do with things that are happening in my personal life. The death of my dad definitely, changed my perspective on that. And, so it was all like personal journeys, and sometimes it's like, oh, I believe in God a little or a lot, or I'm praying, I'm not praying. praying. It is interesting, though, to remind people that we were always allowed to pray in school. And I'm like, well, that makes sense. Because, I mean, when did you need to pray, harder than when you had a test that you didn't study that well for?
Dear God, I didn't study for this algebra test. Please put numbers in my brain.
I was like, in retrospect, that's probably where I prayed the most. For that, the story that you were, or about the guy buying specifically Trump Bibles. What do you think he was he trying to get, fall in Trump's good graces, or what was going on there?
Yeah.
Some undercover deal?
Yeah,
because so many of these are have a relationship to money,
It definitely, there was definitely a lot of, he publicly, just oozed praise of Trump, and, there's, the Bible is a pretty popular book.
Right.
Find it at local bookstores everywhere.
Right.
Didn't have to buy the Trump one. Funny enough, the way that he tried to explain it was he's like, well, it's also going to include like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And then the Bibles came and they were like missing some of the amendments. Like, I was like, it was crazy. I mean, thank goodness he's gone. Thank goodness for the parents and kids of Oklahoma.
Right.
That they are moving in a direction where, hopefully they're going to get the money back that they need and the resources that they need. But yeah, I mean, he left to go to run this like right-wing think tank. So, I don't know if you're familiar with the term auditioning, but I'm not saying anything.
And do you know off the top of your head what the difference between the Trump version of the Bible is and other versions?
It was
just that. Okay.
Yeah, so they added that into there. And because Trump makes it, then Trump organization gets the money. Mm-hmm. Like the Trump Bitcoin and the Trump stakes and the Trump tie.
I'm sure it's gold embossed as well.
Oh, absolutely. Fake gold, probably. So
yeah. Let's see. Okay, and then so those you kind of went over. Those are some like lesser known battles that are happening. Are there any specific battles that you think are still ongoing that we as constituents should really be paying attention to? Should be talking about at the water cooler, or maybe not at the water cooler if it's going to get us kicked out of our jobs in the group chat.
Right. Well, there's a couple of things that people can be on the lookout for. So we've also seen 2 states pass laws to allow chaplains into public schools to operate as counselors or therapists. And most, I think in both states a law was passed and then the school district had to pass a policy basically like to allow it.
Okay.
So one thing that you can absolutely do, whether you have kids or not, is keep an eye on your local school board agenda. And looking for things that just don't look right. That's one of the things that we've seen come up. And then if you do, you can go to au.org and we have a report of violation link at the top of our
very
every
easy.
page.
I saw it on the link. Yeah.
Yes.
Saw it right there. I said, "Oh, I love that."
Yeah, and or you can even just email us and we can get some resources out to you. So that's one thing that we see moving across the spectrum. And everybody lives in a school district. Mm-hmm. So the other thing for everybody that lives in a school district is a number of years ago, the Supreme Court passed a case that allows for what's called release time for religious instruction.
Right.
Which allows school districts to pass a policy for this, and then for parents to permit their children to be taken out of the school day, so out of being taught, the school subjects, to go to a religious institution to be indoctrinated into religion. Mm-hmm. And the main culprit behind that is a company called LifeWise. And so LifeWise is a name that you kind of want to have on your radar.
I want to look this up right now. Yeah. It sounds questionable.
Yeah. And so here's the thing. Is there anything wrong with parents allowing their kids to learn about the religion that they choose? Absolutely not. Is there a problem because they never take them out of like recess? right? They never take them out of PE. Like, it's always like, let's take them out of science. You know, and
That
then
would
go
be the
there.
main one. Yeah. The landing page says every week, tens of thousands of public school students legally attend LifeWise Bible classes, and then all caps during school hours.
During
Voice
school
your support. Watch the video.
Yeah. And so,
Wait, and then and I'm sure you're familiar with this, in theaters October 23rd, Off School Property, solving the separation of church and state. So
Yeah.
direct punch in the gut.
we're not really trying to plug them, Corinne, in that documentary, but
I'm sorry. Sorry. Got to plug both sides on the. I'm gonna have to watch this. Now I have to watch this. I have to watch Bad Faith, and then I have to watch this.
yes, also Bad Faith documentary.
Yeah.
And so they take the kids out. And so again, you know, there's a lot of problems with that just from like a learning standpoint. As a former teacher, that like really bothers me.
Yeah.
But like what the other big issues are like, so part of the reason you don't, this shouldn't be allowed, and the Supreme Court got this wrong, is like, so the 5 kids out of like 25 who aren't Christian or whose parents are non-religious, they either get left behind and they're not getting taught. They're getting put into like the library and study hall just to sit. So they're losing all of their
Busy time.
instruction.
Yeah.
Or when you're that 10-year-old, you're that middle school kid, what's the most important thing? Fitting in. You don't want to be the odd kid out. So the pressure to just go along and be like, hey, just sign this, mom, and let me go, you know, and then you go, or you get bullied because you're the queer kid, you know, and so then it becomes, it's not about teaching the kids that already believe in their version of Christianity at these LifeWise academies. It's bringing the kids that don't or believe something else, and then by being there, you indoctrinate them.
It's using peer pressure to indoctrinate.
Yeah.
Actually, this is the thing. I disagree with a lot of what's going on, but I do feel like they are able to mobilize and organize in a way that, the left has failed to many times.
Yeah.
It's impressive.
It is a multi-billion-dollar industry. We call it the shadow network, and it is it's in the Bad Faith movie, and also like on our website, it is an interconnected group of billionaires and foundations and companies who collaborate to spread this type of kind of insidious ideology, like funding things like LifeWise, funding things like ALEC, which is a company that basically just writes shitty legislation, a lot of it Christian nationalist, and sends it to all these legislators across the country and says, like, do this. And that's how we got like chaplains. That's how we got school vouchers, where we take your tax dollars and give it to rich families who are already sending their kids to private Christian schools and just give them more money. Because you know what a $5,000 voucher doesn't get a poor family? A $40,000 education at a private school. Right.
Yeah,
they don't have 35, so like vouchers are such a scheme on top of that. But yeah, no, I mean, they're very well funded. They use a lot of tech. They're not, I think sometimes people think of, when you think of like Christian nationalism or like, there's this idea of like, bumbling or like not so smart or like not using technology. And it's like, oh no. They left that stereotype decades ago. Right. Like they are actually and have been at the cutting edge of like using technology to recruit people. One of the most insidious scenes from that documentary Bad Faith is they designed a program for pastors to use, and it would mine the data from pastors' information about their congregants. Which would record things like who had mental health disorders, who was depressed, who had recently lost, somebody. And they would then use that in their location, and they would micro-target them with social media ads about coming to the local church, and again, church not bad, but like into the Ralph Reed Christian moral majority church, where they would find church.
So it's really just preying on the vulnerable.
Preying on the vulnerable.
Which is exactly that, we talked about, earlier about people who aren't religious but are spiritual, and as a 40-year-old single white woman, and I know many of those people, but that's what I see so much, going on in like the spirituality and like the wellness space online that is like, this is just preying on vulnerable people. This is preying on someone who just went through a divorce. This is preying on someone who's having fertility issues. Like it's really, really tough to watch. And I think I'm super sensitive to that. And I, as someone, and I know you have too, lost a parent, because what your mind goes through when that's happening. And, certainly not the time when I was making like the strongest choices in my life. And I go, oh, that if there was any period of time that someone could have got me to join a religion, it was 100% that time. I think it would have been Buddhism, but still.
Right. Yeah.
I'm also seeing here geofencing being used by churches to poach other churches' members, and as a coordinated campaign whenever someone goes into a church to hit them with pro-Israeli ads.
Oh, Mike loves Israel.
No, I'm
Well, yeah, geofencing can be used for like anything. I think the issue here is the preying on people when they're vulnerable, and then explicitly to bring them into this kind of like right-wing Christian, white nationalist, kind of grouping.
I think I just think it's unethical.
Yeah.
Like just when people are at their lowest, and I know that's often when people do find religion, but it's still, I'm always wary of making a decision that's that important and life altering when you are in that state of mind, because you'll kind of just do anything to make the pain go away when you're there. And I don't know that's like, it's almost like, you can't sign a contract to be in a movie when you're drunk. It's, to me, the same thing. You're kind of drunk on grief or whatever what you're going through.
Yeah.
How do you think media, like especially right-wing media, help to normalize this religious extremism, under the guise of traditional values, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this attempt to define traditional values as something that only like one group of people have.
Right.
Like, as if nobody who's progressive or liberal likes being married. Like marriage is only this right-wing thing, or like
I think they think
kids.
that, though.
I think they do, yeah.
Yeah.
Or they think that we do weird things in our marriages, like marry people of the same sex.
Right.
So, so I think one thing is like, just geofencing, gatekeeping.
Yeah.
I mean, like you gatekeep the idea of traditional family values.
Mm-hmm.
So that one of the traditional family values is being in our like kind of like Christian nationalist far right church, right? And then that becomes like your family. And if you're a good person, then you are kind of like falling into that. Instead of this idea where like, that's totally fine if you want to do that, but it also needs to be fine for the person who wants to be a Unitarian or, be a pagan or, whatever the case may be. And so, I think that I think that media has given voice to people on the extremes and platformed them in a way that's normalized it. And of course, nobody more so than, he who shall not be named in the White House, where it's just, it's okay. It's okay to make fun of like a disabled kid on national TV while running for president. Like, it's okay to talk about like grabbing women. And so now that like the cork has been uncorked, the Pandora's box as it is, now it's just fine to be like, whatever the next most like extreme is. And I think that just feeds an ecosystem, and the polling and the research that we have done has shown that, folks on both ends tend to like migrate to specific news sources, but on the right, it is like so specific. Like they go to a couple of places and they get it from there, and like very specific social media sites and a couple on the left. And one of the things that I think distinguishes it, the research shows, is like, even though you could gravitate, there's still information coming from more sources,
right?
Even if it still is oftentimes reinforcing one's own worldview, and neither of those is perfect, but it's like, the folks, especially in the like Christian nationalist world, which, is maybe 20%, they're all hearing the same thing, and they're all around people who at least say they believe the same thing, and they've been taught that you are a bad person if you don't believe the same thing, which also then makes everybody else the other, and therefore it's fine to hold dominion over them, and it's fine to take over the levers of government and culture and other things. This is this branch of Christian nationalism called dominionism. It's okay to take over all these levers of power because these people, like, they can't help themselves. Like, they need to be saved, and they need to be ruled and governed by, people who know better. And like, when has a small group of people who felt that they know better than everybody else trying to take over government taken us down the wrong path? No historical precedent for that. And that's why it's like, it is scary, you know? And the media does. It has a lot to do with it. And the Christian nationalist, and even wider, just like right-wing extremism, they have their own media channels. They have their own movie companies. They have their own publishing companies. They have their own music companies. Like, they literally, everybody's talking about this new Taylor Swift album. Is it good? Do you like it?
I didn't love it, and I'm like a big Tortured Poets Department fan, so I know like a lot of people didn't like her that previous album. I loved that. It was like my second favorite album of all time. I kind of was just like, I don't know. I could tell from the cover art and the title I wasn't gonna like Life of a Showgirl, though. I just knew it.
I've friends that like it, and the ones that don't like it are like, she needs to be sad and break up again. Like, that's just.
I don't feel that. And it was interesting because it did get into this like political social conversation, and I'm like, it has never been my goal to get married and have kids, but I was so happy for Taylor Swift when she got engaged, because I know that she wants that, and she's brought me so much joy. I want her to have joy in whatever form she wants it. So it pissed me off that they made it seem like, oh, feminists like don't want people to get married and have kids. I go, I might not want to get married and have kids, but I want my friends who want to get married and have kids, and Taylor Swift in this scenario is my friend. I want them to get married and have kids. I don't want her to be unhappy or to keep dating bad guys just to make good content. That's, kind of what Guys We Fucked podcast is trying to dissolve, like stopping you from dating the same guy over and over again. And she did. She dated a different type of guy, and what do you know? It worked out. Like, she corrected her own pattern, which is ideal, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I bring this up because this
I know, I was like, where are we going with this? And now you're a Christian.
Yes. Is that this conversation that we're able to have, as somebody who's I'm not a Taylor Swift fan or not, I've never listened to the album, like, it's just blind what it is, but we can have this conversation. On the far reaches of like the far right and Christian nationalism, they can't. Because they're not listening to Taylor Swift. Right. That doesn't enter into the household. That doesn't enter into the music devices. Like, they are not, they're not excited for Wicked for Good coming up, because they're never going to see it, because they're going to be seeing movies made by, these like Christian movie companies. And again, there's nothing wrong with those things. Right. There's nothing wrong with Christian music, Christian movies, secular movies, like all of those things. The problem is that, one, when you limit yourself to that's your only worldview, and then two, you use that to be like, everything else is bad. It's not just like, it used to be like, oh, I like country music, I don't like country music. And now it's like, people who like country music are good, people who like country music are bad. And that is this kind of cultural bubble that they're creating for themselves. And not just for themselves, but trying to create for all of us, because then the next step is, and what they're, as we've seen with some of like the boycotts and stuff, is it's not just okay that like, I don't buy Pride merchandise from the store, but Target can't sell Pride merchandise to anyone. It's not just that like, I'm not going to go to like, a Juneteenth celebration, but our city or our county or whatever can't celebrate Juneteenth at all, because that's not part of our worldview.
Right. And it's interesting because I feel the same way, even as a liberal, I often feel like a lot of like the content that I take in or the shows on Netflix, they all kind of have the same worldview. And I get tired of that.
Which is
too.
a whole nother problem.
Yeah, and I really do. So, when, I guess a good example recently would be like Hunting Wives. It's like, yes, the main character is a liberal, but she enters this world where everyone else is, going out and hunting, and their main job is staying home and supporting their husband's occupation, whether that be, the pastor or the person who's running for office. And it was just refreshing to see another type of life, even though it's a life that I have no interest in leading, reflected on my screen, because I just get tired of hearing the same thing. I'm like, I believe this, and I still feel like I'm being force-fed these points of view sometimes. So I can understand that other people feel that way. But yeah, I mean, I do. It is interesting with like PragerU and stuff. There's just so many well-funded companies that can create exactly, for a group of people who don't want their children to be indoctrinated, they certainly do a lot of indoctrinating.
Right. And that's their fun play with language, right? Like,
right.
We're standing up for making sure our kids don't get indoctrinated so that we can make sure that all kids get indoctrinated by us.
Right.
As opposed to like what was supposed to be our goal, which is to just raise critical thinkers.
Right.
And then you can kind of decide, fact is fact, but like in a lot of things, you get to decide how you feel about something and what your opinion is.
Right.
But they don't want that. That's with all of the book bans that Christian nationalists, it's not enough that my kid can't check out that book from the library. No kid is allowed to have that book from the library.
Yeah, because then like one kid might tell the other kid, no, Santa's not real, kind of a thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So,
You mentioned, sorry.
I just wanted to follow up on the PragerU thing.
We love PragerU. We talk about PragerU a lot on Without Country.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, what is the, like you're talking about the separation of church and state. This is a company that Trump has like publicly tagged as a successor to PBS. Like public funds will be going there to a place that is pushing a viewpoint. Is that like at the top of the list for you when it's like, you guys either need to change your content to get within standards or this public money can't flow to you?
So, so interestingly, in Texas, they passed a law, not a law, but the State Board of Education approved a new history curriculum and it's called Bluebonnet. And it is kind of the equivalent of PragerU in that it was developed to infuse and utilize religious stories and religious teachings as part of like the everyday curriculum. They were so certain that it was going to be successful and that school districts were going to adopt it that they said, if you adopt it, we'll give you $60 extra per student in your district. Kind of, maybe they weren't so thinking that they were going to go with it, and they had to try to bribe them. And that's what it is. So it's not like, Scholastic and all of these others, companies that make, books for schools were allowed to like bid on them because they create the contract. This happened in Oklahoma, the same with the Bible. That's how they got the Trump Bible is, they wrote it and said like, this is how it, if you're going to bid on this, giant order, then this is what you have to make it as. Fun fact, people think that California is the largest, it's the largest country, most population, that it's the biggest education market. But the state of California gives every school district the ability to choose the books in its classroom. Texas does not. Texas buys one book and it goes to all the districts. So what Texas does has huge ramifications in the educational technology and educational curriculum industry. So so this is a big one. So that's actually something that we're working really hard to fight right now, because one of the saving graces is that, you don't have to approve it, or you don't automatically get it. You have to choose to accept it as the district. If you don't, you're obviously giving up a big chunk of money, which of course, who wants to hurt kids by, withholding money because we don't want to teach them about, Moses and the parting of the Red Sea in science class. And so, that is something that we're fighting, and that, if and when, we might have to see if that fight has to escalate.
No, you mentioned before in passing pagans. I mean, for these smaller, I'm just interested because I'm like, yeah, I always talk about how I've been studying witchcraft since I was 12, and I'm very into it. And I think there are certain religions, that being one of them, that people kind of like honestly like turn their nose up at or mock. Like, do pagans have a seat at the table?
Yeah. We have a faith advisory council.
Yeah.
Which is along with like thousands and thousands of faith leaders that are also part of our support network. And one of the persons who's been with us the longest, she's a pagan spiritualist practitioner. We actually filed a lawsuit on her behalf. That's how she came to be with us.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, she filed the lawsuit to challenge I'm hoping I get this right, to challenge the Veterans Affairs decision not to allow pagan symbols as one of the approved religious symbols on fallen soldiers' gravestones. So you can have a cross, you can have a Star of David, you can have a crescent.
That's interesting that you would even have to approve it, because it's like whatever your religion was, it was.
Well, if it's a real religion.
Oh,
right?
so they're questioning.
Right. I mean, this was decades ago.
Okay.
I just want to be clear.
Right.
And I mean, not to say that I think there's more acceptance of pagans and people who are nature spiritualists, but it's, I think
like paganism is old. I'm like, if we're talking about something, I'm like, this is not new. Okay.
Yeah. So, it was like, it was the same thing. I don't think we filed these lawsuits, but, there's chaplains in the military, and you had to be of an approved religion, and kind of many of the smaller religions have had to fight and often resort to lawsuits to be able to get access to that.
Yeah. I was thinking what is a religion that we might not have heard of that is represented by someone in Americans United?
Yeah, I mean, pagan spiritual. I mean, we run the gambit. We have an annual conference in Washington, D.C. called the Summit for Religious Freedom. You can check it out, www.thesurfsrf.org. It's in April, and one of the questions that we ask for registrants, we had about 800 total people there last year, is to what is your faith or spiritual or non-religious, background, and I think we had 65 different answers to that, different categories of folks. But that is the beauty of faith and religion and spirituality is it is so diverse. And it's, it's so that's why we're so careful when we talk about Christian nationalism is it is a very specific interpretation of Christianity because there are hundreds, if not over, thousands of different denominations of Christianity.
Right.
I mean, you wouldn't have Protestantism if somebody didn't say, I don't agree with what the Catholics are doing, so we're breaking away. Now it's the Protestants break away into a new denomination every week. That's part of their jam. They're like, if we don't like what's happening, if it doesn't resonate with us, we'll go out and do things a little different and call it something a little different. And the beauty is they're all welcome here. There is no other place in the world where that type of diversity and multitude of religious and non-religious beliefs, can flourish, but it can only flourish if we protect the government from getting involved with them or any one of those, many different belief systems from attempting to take over and impose that on all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing. All right, so I have 2 questions left. I know I'm sure you've had a long day. You're a very busy man. You touched on earlier that it was your Catholic upbringing that brought you to this work and inspired you to do that. Is there any more to that story? That was there a moment that you realized you wanted to come work for this? Was there various job offers on the table and this one spoke to you more? What kind of brought you here?
So it really goes back to my childhood. I was raised Catholic. Every Sunday we went to church. I went to CCD, and I would try to negotiate on Sundays. I just stay home and watch the religion channel for an hour. That never flew. But I grew up in a Catholic church where I can honestly say I never remembered from the pulpit the pastor speaking ill of anyone. And it's not like they didn't have the problematic dogma that they have, in my opinion. But everything was about treat your neighbor the way you want to be treated, help out those that are less fortunate. You know, through the Catholic Church, I went to Mexico and built houses. We brought, food to the soup pantry. We adopted a family at Christmas and bought presents for them that they could then wrap and give to their kids. Like, that was just what Catholicism was about. Mm-hmm. That was how I understood Jesus to be, and that was just what was instilled in me. So, like, I started volunteering at a young age. I organized a group in high school. We used to go to these local residential facilities for AIDS patients because many had been abandoned by their families, and we did like bingo with them and Halloween parties, and just that just instilled in me that it was important to do good in this world and to give back and to try to, I've been very fortunate and blessed in my life in many ways. And it's important to, I think, try to give back and help others. That's where I got it from. Mm-hmm. And my parents lived that out. I mean, they did the same thing. And, I'm no longer Catholic, but I absolutely root where my work right now, trying to protect people's rights and freedoms and help out folks that are less fortunate and minority groups, and I don't just mean racial, but gender and sexuality and religion, mm-hmm. and all of those things. That it's just like we're the, it's so cliche, but we are the most resourced country in the history of the world. Like we shouldn't put up with the needs and wants that we see on the street, with the greed, that we see
especially in a Christian nation.
And especially in a Christian nation. It's so funny. I can barely see you, so I keep thinking you are the voice of God that's talking. So it's very apropos.
And then lastly, I guess what practical steps, I told you before you came on air, a lot of our listeners feel overwhelmed and they want to do something, but they don't know what it is that they can do. So how can they support this constant fight for the separation of church and state, whether it's through educating themselves, through their others, advocacy, donating money? I guess that's probably the last one because everyone's always asking for money. Yes. So what are other things that they can do besides donating money to help this cause?
Yeah. So, first of all, when are we publishing? Do we know?
Next Wednesday.
Okay. All right. I was going to, well, by that point, hopefully some of you have been to the No Kings rallies in your neighborhood this Saturday.
Is there a specific sign we should make for it? About separation of church and state? I need sign ideas every time.
I'm just always, mine's just no kings ever. Mm-hmm. That's it. Simple.
Not even King Kylie?
Not even King Kylie.
Bad week for King Kylie. Wait, I got a sign idea. The only king is King Kylie, I guess, has to be my sign for
Well,
Saturday.
Are you going to bring it in and have it be the background of the show for next
I'll dress like Kylie Jenner for it.
There you go. So the first thing is that I want people to know you are not alone in feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Take some comfort in the millions of people that are feeling the same way. Mm-hmm. The second thing is that is part of the plan. Part of the plan of our opposition is make people feel so overwhelmed that they think that they can't do anything, mm-hmm. right? And if you think you can't do anything, then what are you most likely to do? Nothing. So the most important thing is to do something. Do something. It doesn't matter how small or how big that it is, but do something that is achievable. So if you can call your congressperson and tell them that, you think that this specific thing going on is terrible, do that. If you can go to a rally on a Saturday, go and do that. Mm-hmm. If you can simply just speak up for what's right, with people who you care about, do that. So that's the first thing is that it always feels like it's not enough. And it's not enough. None of us can do enough on our own. We can only do a little bit together to get to enough. So some of the things that you can do to get involved with Americans United, first of all, follow us on social media. Almost all the platforms we're at Americans United. check out our website at au.org. There's lots of great materials there to learn more about not just Christian nationalism, but like what is church-state separation? Like, church-state separation is what protects LGBTQ rights, because most attacks against LGBTQ protections are religiously based. It protects reproductive freedom. It protects the right to access an abortion. It protects the right to be able to read and access literature, because all of those, when they try to be banned, are almost always religiously based. So there's great information both on our social media and on our website. If you go to au.org, I should probably know this. We go to au.org/get-involved. That'll show you all the things that you can do. We have a youth program for folks under the age of 26, student contests to win scholarship money.
Oh, wow.
We have a year-long paid youth fellowship program. We have scholarships to the Summit for Religious Freedom to be able to attend. There's petitions on the website, that you can fill out and choose to get involved. And if you want to stay regularly involved on that Take Action page, sign up to join our AU Action Network. And my colleague who runs our development department would hate me if I didn't say it, but our membership is $35 a year.
Oh, that's pretty inexpensive.
It's really inexpensive.
I'll become a member after I get off the air.
So au.org/donate. And I will say something else about that is that I think oftentimes people don't donate too because they think, oh, well, I can't give enough. Donating of your time is the same as donating of your money. If you can give $5, it matters. If you can give 5 minutes, it matters. But do something. And once you start doing something, then the next thing will get a little bit easier. And you'll also start to see that the thing that was insurmountable, that they tried to convince you that you couldn't do, actually is achievable. And you'll start to see all the other, I filled out one online petition and I felt insignificant. And then a few days later, the organization said, we delivered 5,000 signatures to your congressperson. Like, that, not 4,999, because you stood up and did something. So take action and do something.
Now, do you feel if I gave everyone in my family an Americans United year-long membership for the holidays, that would be me stepping on their right to make their own decision? Or
No,
is that
and
okay?
You want to know the best part?
That's the kind of thing I would do.
Oh my God. With your annual membership of $35 at Americans United. So we do a quarterly printed magazine.
Okay.
So if you want to give somebody in your life who maybe needs to see the light of church-state separation and want to surprise them with it,
nice.
Gift them that. And then a few months down the road, they're going to call you and be like, the weirdest thing came in the mail to me today.
Wow.
So it's a great, it makes for great holiday reading.
I think this is going to be good. This is going to be good. That's exciting. That's very that's very feasible. Well, thank you so much for coming on here.
Absolutely. Thanks for all you do for the community, for the issues that matter. Honestly,
right back at you. I always brag about my friends. I go, guys, I have friends that are changing the world. Marriage equality, Americans United. Come on, stop it.
I have friends that are changing the world.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Thank you so much for being on here. And yeah, I know it's a long day and you're always traveling, but I appreciate this. And yeah, this is incredibly informative. And I think people hopefully after this episode feel like there's something they can do, even if it's just a little something. That's kind of the message I'm trying to push on here.
Yes.
We all don't have time to, take 6 months off to just like do something else, but we all have time to do a little bit of something. And especially people on the left calling, their elected officials. AOC told us the right is doing it. They're running laps around us when it comes to making those calls. And I think that a lot of people think those calls don't do anything, but they actually do put pressure on elected officials. So
absolutely,
we'll all start somewhere. We'll get those memberships going. Thank you so much for being here, Brian Silva,
You're
Americans
welcome.
United. Watch Bad Faith and not that other one that I talked about. I'll watch it privately and tell you about it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks.
Of course. All right. So that was my conversation with Brian Silva, the Vice President of Outreach at Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Hopefully those calls to action are things that you feel motivated and excited to engage with. And I am definitely going to become a member for the low price of $35 a year. That sounded like a deal to me. I'm like, $35, that's a deal. That's like one Uber Eats that I just won't get.
And a significantly better pitch than Mother Jones.
Oh God, yeah, the Mother Jones pitch. He didn't trick us into it. I directly asked him, "How can we support you?" And he directly gave me a no bullshit response, which I really appreciate it. And when you go to the landing page for donations, it says, "This is a critical moment for us at Americans United. We are at the forefront of defending church-state separation and everyone's right to live as themselves and believe as they choose," which to me not only sounds so American, but in many ways sounds like what both the right and the left at the core of their arguments are fighting for, right? This notion like that, that we just want to live as ourselves and believe what we want to believe. Like that is something that I feel like the right and the left inherently agree on, but they also want but where it kind of diverts is that they also want everyone else to live as them. And I think that both the right and the left in many ways are guilty of that, right? Because they think to be good and to be right is to live as they are living. And I think in our own unique ways, again, both the right and the left are guilty of such a state. When we say things like, on the left, like I'm on the right side of history, or like I'm a good person. Even something as basic as I'm a good person. It's like, all right, well, I mean, who's making that decision, really? I don't know. If a lot of people on the right are correct, and God is the ultimate decider of who is good and who is not. I mean, a lot of us are going to hell. Do I believe that? No, but it's like, do we really know? We don't 100% know. You can live life. I think, hopefully being a good person is up to more to like interpretation or to intent. That's what I'm hoping. Fingers crossed. It's more about intent. And so there are multiple ways to have lived your life as a good person. And hopefully a lot of them are are based on intent. Not 100% based on execution or results. Otherwise, a lot of us are fucked. But yeah, that's a way if you want to monetarily, support Americans United. And I'm not joking. I kind of talked about giving this away as a holiday gift, but like it doesn't have to be your only holiday gift. But I am always like, and not just like start a fight at Christmas. Like that's not why I do it. But I am always like, and my mom does this too, like making donations or getting people worldwide wildlife Federation stuffed animal, but because I made a donation to animals that are going extinct or something like that. I think it is a good way to remember what the holidays are really about, especially if you're one of these people who's like so opposed to capitalism. It is a way to kind of give back, not just to the people but also to people or animals or living things that you don't know. Hopefully not too obnoxious, not too liberally. Republicans can do it too. Everyone can do it. These are things that everyone can do. Make those calls, show up to those protests with, signs that are going to make people laugh, get their attention. I do think that humor is an important element in some ways. And, again, I love the arguments that Brian was using because I really think that we want freedom, and so many people want to, be the moral compass for their children and not have other people's ideas or, that they might disagree with infiltrating their children's minds. And so a lot of the ways that he approached this conversation of separation of church and state, I think was really smart. Obviously, this is, 80 plus years of work that they have to figure out an approach that works to having conversations like this, and just being peaceful and opening up people's minds. Again, this is not separation of church and state. If anyone wants to start talking with you about that, is not by any means anti-religion. It is not by any means anti-Christian. It's just saying that we are not all Christian. That was the deal we made at the beginning with America, and we're not all Christian. But if you're Christian, you should be able to peacefully practice Christianity, but also if you're anything else, you should be able to peacefully practice that and worship as you see fit, and not have those points of views or the tenets of your religion affect the government in which we live. And I think, it just seems so simple and something that is so to me like matter of fact, but obviously this, is a larger conversation about control. And, people are going to lust for love and control and money until the end of time. So I think that's something that we will always be fighting against. But anyway, that was our episode. I hope you enjoy. You can follow me on social media at Philanthropy Gal. You can follow Mike at Them Harrington. If you want to be a doll, you can go and subscribe to the Without a Country YouTube channel, even if that's not how you consume the show. Super helpful. If you want to join our Patreon, we already have our amazing dictator, Christopher Fungi, so you can't cop his spot, but you can be a capitalist pig or a cutie. You'll get a shout out and you'll get one exclusive video news story every single week to complement this main show. You can head over to patreon.com/withoutacountry to do that. And of course, grab those tickets to Guys We Fucked, the New York Comedy Festival show. Guys We Fucked presents Slutsgiving, Friday, November 14th at the Crown Hill Theater in Brooklyn. Gonna be a banger of a night. It's the only live Guys We Fuck show that Christina and I are doing in this calendar year, and we are going to make it incredible. This is certainly optional, and I know that disposable income is already hard to come by these days, but we are also doing a food drive at that show. It is Thanksgiving, even sluts give back. So if you want to bring a non-perishable food item, Christina and I are going to personally deliver that to a local food bank after the show. I mean, not night of, they'll be closed, but later that weekend, or on Monday when we go back to the studio, we will make that delivery so that everyone, because we got to do the work that our government isn't doing, basically. We shouldn't really even have to have food banks because our government should be like fucking doing shit like that. We shouldn't have to have constituents making donations. But guys, we're fucked, okay? We're fucked, and we need to show up for each other and have some sense of community going on. Because I think it'll make everyone feel better and everyone treat everyone else nicely. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you very much. Have a wonderful week, and we'll be back with a live show again next week. Peace.